Welcome to the Pilot's Inner Circle on Flight Training Radio, where a good pilot is always learning. Now, here's your host and certified flight instructor extraordinaire, Jason Schappert.
Hey everybody, Jason Schappert here of M0A.com, and welcome to Flight Training Radio Live. Part of the Pilot's Inner Circle, which is something new we've been doing. It's been a great chance to reach out to you guys, reach out to that aviation community, that flight training community, and really, share, my experience as a flight instructor, and a great chance to, answer your questions, of course, all in the live environment. What you're listening to right now is the free portion of the Pilot's Inner Circle podcast. There is a continued version after we get done with this that is for members only, and it's also good for FAA Wings credit, so you can work towards renewing your pilot certificate just by listening to these podcasts when you're working out or driving home on your commute or something like that. So anyways, you can learn more about that by going to pilotsinnercircle.com. So you guys can check that out. But for now, if you guys have any questions, feel free to call in now. That number to call in is 877-537-6704. We can take your calls live. When you call that number, you'll probably be asked to, I think it's press 1 if you have a question for Jason, and that will forward you to my lovely wife. She'll pick up, screen the call, and then pass it on to me. So that's how that works. Again, that number is 877-537-6704. And what I want to chat with you guys today about is something the FAA is really getting big on, and that is working as a team in the cockpit. Now, that's not exactly how the FAA puts it. The FAA puts it into what's called CRM, which is Crew Resource Management. Also, there's another term they're throwing out there now, which is SRM, Single Pilot Resource Management. Now, in the first portion of this podcast, we're going to talk about CRM, and then for my members, we'll continue on, and we're going to chat a little bit more about SRM and how you can be an effective single pilot in the cockpit, operating solo or with non-flying pilots. So what I want to chat about, though, with you guys is, first off, CRM. I want to talk about two aspects of this. Working with other pilots, flying with a friend who's a pilot, working with your flight instructor even, and then flying with non-pilots. Because just because that person doesn't have a pilot license or doesn't have maybe any experience with flying, that doesn't mean they're not an asset to you when you guys are flying. Excuse me. And real quick, so I just want to reiterate, just because we're talking about CRM today, if you guys have any flight training questions, towards the end we'll open this up. Doesn't have to be CRM related. Any flight training questions, I'm happy to get those in for you guys. So anyways, continuing on here, let's first start talking about with another pilot, because you're going to get a lot of time with a friend who's a pilot. You're going to meet at the flight school. Use that person as a safety pilot, maybe building up some instrument time. What can you do to effectively work as a team with another pilot? Well, the first thing, and this is, talk about beating a dead horse now, is the passenger brief. And man, we have talked about this 3 weeks in a row now. Wouldn't you think that means it's pretty important, talking about a passenger brief? But in your passenger brief, there's some really important areas that you need to focus on. For example, the basic tasks. Who's going to do those basic tasks? For example, I always like to define what I call the flying pilot and the talking pilot. Now, those aren't any fancy FAA terms or anything like that, but defining the flying pilot. Who is going to be the sole manipulator of the flight controls during this flight? And who is going to be the talking pilot? No, not the pilot that tells all the silly jokes and that sort of stuff, but who is the pilot that is working the radios? Who is the pilot that is reading back and writing down clearances? the flying pilot, and the talking pilot. Now, the same thing you're going to realize goes for emergencies. For example, this sort of stuff has to be briefed. If you were to have an engine failure on takeoff, if you were having an engine failure in flight, it doesn't matter the situation. The thing is, if you were to have an emergency, who is going to be flying the airplane? And who is going to be in charge of squawking 7700 and communicating your message? The flying pilot and the talking pilot. Those are two roles that you need to explain to your pilot, your friend, whoever the other pilot you're flying with. And both of you need to fully understand those roles, know which role you fit into. You want to establish this early. That's why I say establish it in the passenger briefing. Why establish it in the passenger briefing? Well, before you ever even leave the ground. And the reason you need to establish this early is why? Well, because pilots are macho. Would that be a good word to use? A pilot is a different personality, a different breed of individual. It takes a very specific individual to be a pilot. You have to be a very confident person, and sometimes people take that confidence a little bit too far. But you have to be a very confident person to be a pilot. So when you get two people who are both very confident in the airplane, and you have an emergency, and you didn't establish who's flying and who's communicating the message to the world for someone to come and find you, you could end up in a pickle when you two are arguing over who is about to make the most important landing of both of your careers effectively. Establish this sort of stuff early, the flying pilot and the talking pilot. Now, here's a few tasks that I like to share with other pilots. Obviously, we talked about flying and radio work. Keep in mind that radio work person is also writing everything down. They're kind of like the person who keeps the minutes during your board meeting or whatever. Everything is being written down. Every clearance is written down because you know what? If you're IFR and you lost radio communications and you need to go back to your last assigned heading, your last assigned altitude, you're going to be really glad you wrote all that stuff down because you're going to have it. I like to sometimes divvy up for my, my talking pilot, navigation work. And this is important too. I don't care if we have a beautiful G1000 in front of us. You know, I am still going to have a sectional chart out, and that sectional chart may be a paper chart or it may be on the iPad, but I like to pick out landmarks as I go. I like to look down that sectional chart and say, okay, there's an airport that should be, about 10 miles, to the northeast. And I like to look out and find that airport. Or, hey, there should be a heart-shaped lake just over here to my right. I like to look out and find that heart-shaped lake. You know what? I understand that GPS stuff is awesome, and I love it. However, nothing beats that pilotage, that dead reckoning style kind of navigation, okay? And you know what? I love technology. A lot of times I'll do that on the iPad. I'll bust out ForeFlight and look at the sectional chart on the iPad and do that. But there's still, that rote level of navigation happening, or raw level of navigation happening would be the better word to use there. So always having a way out too. That's another part of this navigation strategy. Again, I've got my emergency field picked out before I ever, or if I ever, had an emergency on that particular flight. I am always playing the what if game. If my engine quits right now, where am I going? 10 miles down the road, that field no longer works. My engine quits now, where am I going? I always have that field picked out and decided. And that's something the other pilot you're flying with, who is just doing the radio work while he has some downtime, he or she can be doing. Just doing basic navigation stuff, just picking out checkpoints, entertaining themselves effectively, helping pass the time, and, looking for those emergency sites. Another important thing, this is a really cool tip, and something I always try to do on long cross countries, is weather research. Here's what I mean by weather research. Coming back from Missouri with a student of mine, flying in a 182, we were VFR. We got up there, we're flying, everything's great. I think we're at like 9,500 feet. Everything was awesome. And then underneath of us, a few layer kind of builds. And that few later becomes a scattered layer, which we start realizing is starting to become more of a broken layer. I'm starting to think, man, what do you do in that sort of situation? Well, obviously, if you're VFR only, you turn back around. However, we were thinking, okay, this gentleman's a private pilot. He wants to do his instrument rating. He just so happens to be flying with a CFII who could give him some instrument training. If that layer continues to get any worse, if push comes to shove, we can get a pop-up IFR clearance, and we'll get some good instrument training out of it on the way back down. We've got all the current proper approach plates, so everything was fine. However, we continued to do weather research. By that I mean, I started picking out every single airport in front of us that had an ATIS. And I was at 9,500 feet, you can get some good range out of the radios. And I started, tuning up each ATIS to listen to what the clouds were doing, to listen to what the winds were doing, so I knew where this layer was pushing to. And sure enough, I started listening to ATISes, 50 miles down the road, and the clouds were scattered. I waited a little bit longer. I picked one out another 50 miles down the road, and the clouds went to few, and the clouds went to 10 and clear. So doing that kind of weather research ahead is something that non-flying pilot could do to help you. Tuning in some ATISes around the area to see what the weather is generally progressing to ahead of your path, because we all know even on the iPad, the 3G and the 4G isn't always the best to pick that sort of stuff up. It can be, especially at 9,500 feet, it's hard. Now, if you have the Stratus or something like that, it's another story that helps quite a bit. For my guys without that kind of technology, though, that's a great way to go about it. Another thing is traffic. I mean, these people are trained to watch for other airplanes in the sky. I know it's a big sky out there. However, help them or have them help you watch for traffic. Another and the final great thing is engine monitoring. I am not a big fan of flying around what I call fat, dumb, and happy. That's you take off, you're climbing out, everything's looking great, you get up to cruise altitude, you kick that autopilot on or you trim up that airplane great, now you loosen the seat belt, you kick the seat back 2 or 3 notches so you can stretch your legs, and you just sit there and look outside. You know what, flying's beautiful and flying's great, but I call that flying around fat, dumb, and happy, because the onset of an engine failure could be as obvious as a slight a progression of a decrease in oil pressure. It's something where it could start in the green, and you look, and now it's at the bottom of the green, and now it's just barely out of the green or moving into the yellow, and you're seeing the oil pressure just slowly drop minute after minute. If you're paying attention to that sort of stuff, you can be alerted of an engine failure before it ever even happens. Don't fly around fat, dumb, and happy. Monitor your fuel situation, monitor your engine situation, stay on top of that sort of stuff. So that's something else a non-flying pilot could do, engine monitoring. So just to recap, they could do the flying, radio work, navigation, weather research, traffic watch, or engine monitoring. Just some great stuff there. And real quick too, again, any flight training related questions, it doesn't have to be related to what we're talking about. Any flight training related questions you guys have, you can call in right now at 877-537-6704. You and I can chat live and answer your question for you to help make you a safer pilot. So you guys can call in and do that while we continue on here. What are we going to do with our non-flying pilots? Let's say you're going up and you're flying with the wife or a friend from work who you promised you would take flying for quite some time. What can you do with these non-flying individuals? Is that non-pilots? Is that a right word? These individuals can still be so helpful, and they can be a part of your crew. All right. For example, these individuals can help you watch for traffic. Don't just, I know a lot of people want to sit there and enjoy themselves, but on a long cross country, they can be valuable to help you watch for traffic. Teach that person how to end up scanning for traffic. That's something they can do to be helpful. Have them notify you if anything seems abnormal. Yeah, I know they're not a pilot or anything like that, but if they see something that they feel might be dangerous, have them bring it to your attention. I understand we want to exercise a sterile cockpit, but a sterile cockpit is only pertains to things that don't pertain to that flight. Does that make sense? I mean, I want that person only talking about things that pertain to this flight, not the football game or anything like that. That's what a sterile cockpit means. So educate these people. Teach them about the engine gauges. For example, like we talked about a decrease in oil pressure. Now, I'm not saying, don't freak these people out now. Don't say, that's our oil pressure gauge, and if it gets below that green arc, the engine's probably going to end up quitting. You don't just say that kind of things to non-pilots. Rather, a great thing you could do would be to take the time to educate that person before each and every flight, because it not only makes you smarter when you have to verbalize that sort of stuff. Again, I always tell people I didn't become a smart pilot until I became a flight instructor, when I had to know this stuff well enough to teach it. That's when you really have to know it. But it's going to make you and your team that you're effectively creating right then and there smarter by doing that. For example, when you stop during the run-up, don't just start running up the airplane and they're going to look at you like, what on earth is going on? Take the time to explain this sort of stuff. Okay, I'm running the engine up to 1,800 RPMs, and now I'm checking my engine gauges. This right here is my oil temperature gauge, and it works, it has a probe and yada, yada, yada. This here is my oil pressure gauge. We want that oil pressure gauge to stay in the green. In fact, we want all these instruments to stay in the green. That's all you have to say. So when they're glancing around, because they're eventually going to be done looking outside and look inside, they're going to peek in, look at that stuff, and go, oh yeah, I remember Jason said that stuff has to be in the green. So if they notice, wait a second, that's not in the green. Hey, Jason, that oil pressure thing's not in the green. You said it had to be in the green. You're going to look over and go, hey, good catch. We need to land somewhere quickly. So just little things like that these individuals can do. So take time to educate each and every flight. Don't just willy-nilly, by the seat of your pants, take these people flying. Take time to educate because it makes you smarter and it makes your team smarter. Again, guys, any flight training related questions you guys have, that number to call in is 877-537-6704. We'll get you live on the air where we can chit chat. We can also connect via Twitter or Facebook if you'd rather type in your question there. Let's see. We're going to take a quick commercial break real quick. We'll be right back and we'll take your questions. Chat with you guys back here in just a second. Are you prepared for an engine failure on takeoff? What if there was runway remaining? What if there isn't? Would you know what to do if you lost radio communications in IFR conditions? My newest book, In-Flight Emergencies, a step-by-step guide to handling the unexpected, will cover all of this and more. Readers learn about a topic such as engine failures on takeoff. Then at the end of the chapter, there's a URL where they can go and watch a video of an actual engine failure on takeoff and see how the pilot applied the skills mentioned in the book. We're adding videos you love to the books you need because a good pilot is always learning. Check out the book at inflightemergencies.com.
Hey there, quick question. What would you do if you lost your logbook? Imagine having to go back in time to track down all of those hours, dates, aircraft flown, and airports landed at. It's near impossible. Trust me, I've done it. Welcome to Runway Log, the best online pilot logbook that lets you log flights on your iPhone, iPad, or Android device. Attach photos to certain entries and see where you've been with our interactive map. Best of all, it's backed up every hour and fully exportable to CSV or PDF. Runway Log has your back. It even sends reminders when your flight review is due. Don't wait another second. Start your free trial of Runway Log today. Visit runwaylog.com. The Pilot's Inner Circle is more than just a ground school. It's a community.
and I want to thank you for all that you're doing. You're going to grow this show. You're going to be the most popular and best instructor in the nation because you focus on people and learning. You're sincere, you have integrity, and you have character, and your wife is a great gal, too.
Members get a chance to interact with me and others each and every week live in the radio shows like the one you're listening to now, or every Monday evening in the mock check rides and weekly workshop webinars that we do.
Jason really does a wonderful job teaching his students all the basics you're going to need to help pass your written test as well as your practical test. Once you're a member, the old online seminars every week. This is really a big key as far as my training was concerned, because there's those nagging questions, exactly what does this do, what does that do?
With a 100% pass rate and over 1,000 check rides passed, what's not to love about the Pilot's Inner Circle? Members also get FAA Wings credit for listening to this very radio show you're listening to now, in addition to the extended version. So what's not to love? Visit pilotsinnercircle.com to become a member today. And we are back. And again, that last little bit we were talking about there, you are listening to the Pilot's Inner Circle podcast on Flight Training Radio. You are listening to the non-member version, or the free portion of it, I guess. There is a continued version on after this gets over for my Pilot's Inner Circle members, where they earn FAA Wings credit, get access to a webinar each and every Monday evening. And speaking of that, by the way, guys, tonight is our mock check ride. Tonight is Monday night, 8 p.m. my time, 8 p.m. Eastern, is tonight's mock check ride, where I'm going to ask the questions. You're going to provide your best answers in the mock check ride environment. So that is tonight. If you're not a member, be sure to sign up so you can participate in that by going to pilotsinnercircle.com. And if you are, make sure you're signed up and your seat's reserved so you get the notices and alerts. Guys, any flight training questions you have, the number to call in right now is 877-537-6704. Lots of sevens in there. And I'll be happy to take any of your flight training questions. Also hit me up on Facebook or Twitter, and we can chat a little bit that way too. We're talking about CRM, and we're going to be talking a little bit later in the members-only portion of this on SRM, Single Pilot Resource Management, where I'm talking about the members on how to be an effective single pilot. Not just solo, but even beyond that, and flying more with non-pilots, because you're not always going to fly with individuals who are pilots, and that's just about as considered single pilot resource management sometimes. So that'll continue on here in just a second. Quick questions. Let's see a question. Actually, Josh asked a question. Josh Shea asked a question. I missed it last week, Josh. Let me take that for you real quick. Josh had a question. Says, hey, Jason, just curious as to your thoughts dealing with maintenance. He had an occurrence the other day where the engine ran really rough and lost power for about 5 seconds. I was busy with the aircraft as the instructor, and upon return to the airport, he was bombarded with questions from the flying club's mechanic. How would you deal with this? And John, it's a valid concern for the mechanic, obviously. I mean, it is. You've got to come from their perspective. You are the only person, you and your student effectively, to know what actually happened to that airplane. Other than that, these mechanics, unless you can recreate the problem on the ground, these mechanics are effectively just chasing a ghost. And I'll tell you, I had a very similar situation. I was on takeoff with a student in 512 Romeo. We were climbing out. We got to about 400 or 500 feet, and we lost about 25% of power. We still had about 75% power. I mean, we had enough power to actually, turn back and land. We weren't, falling out of the sky. We were actually still able to climb even at only 75% power. But I'm thinking to myself, I lost 25%. It's only a matter of time until I lose the other 75%. At least in my head, that's how I thought. So we ended up turning back, uncontrolled airports, nothing major, just announced that I was coming back, landed, just the next available runway, and got on the ground and could not recreate the problem. I went over to the mechanic and I told him, listen, I was flying. We lost at least 25% of the power. Scared me to death. However, I pulled it over and did the run-up, and I can't get it to do it again. So the mechanic hops in the airplane. We sit in the airplane together. We run it up. We simulate like we're taking off, just holding the brakes full power. Did that for like 5 minutes, and it wouldn't do it. Thinking, oh my goodness. So, we knew, like you said there, you could be chasing a ghost. That's why the mechanic wants to know so much. And I told them all I knew. And in that sort of situation, you just need to think, what on earth could have caused this problem? And it was something I didn't even end up thinking of. The mechanic just started troubleshooting, and the interesting thing about it was we actually had an oil leak where oil leaked into the magneto. And the only reason we knew that is because I told him when we landed, we were out of the green in the oil pressure department. I said, we lost power and the oil pressure went down. So it's something oil related. That's all I needed to give him. That was enough of a clue for him to troubleshoot it, to realizing, hey, oil got on the magneto. Oil's not a great conductor. Ruined some of your spark. That's why you lost your power. Cleaned it up, and it hasn't had a problem since. So those are the kind of clues you need to look at. If you think about it next time, glance down at the oil pressure. What's it doing? The engine's running rough. Okay, fully enriching the mixture. Sit on the ground and try to recreate that problem with them. That's some great stuff you can do there. So, anyways, glad to hear you're safe first and foremost. But I totally understand. You're very busy with the airplane. My only goal in that entire situation, Josh, was to let's get this airplane on the ground safely. I didn't care what was wrong. I just knew something was wrong. And then later, my mechanic said, well, did you test this? He asked me, he goes, well, did you cycle the ignition to off and to back on? I'm thinking, sir, I was at 400 feet, scared for my life. I'm thinking I just want to put this airplane down on the ground. I didn't have time to be troubleshooting. I had time to be landing that airplane safely. And that's just how a mechanic thinks. But, try to recreate that problem on the ground. That's the best advice you can get from there. And glance over at the oil pressure. But the most important thing, which you did, is to fly that airplane. Nothing else matters. Fly that airplane. Unfortunately, they may be chasing a ghost. They got to find what was wrong with it. But, they'll end up figuring that out. So, anyway, sorry I missed your question there, by the way. So, anyways, guys, any other questions you guys have for me, feel free to, actually, we're going to be wrapping it up here. So that was probably the last question we'll take, and we'll move on to the members-only portion of this. But before we do, my friends on the East Coast with that hurricane, my beautiful wife and I, we are praying for you. Being from Florida, we understand what hurricanes are like, and hopefully you'll be able to listen to the recording of this, just in case you don't have power or anything like that. We'll be praying for you guys and your airplanes, that everybody stays safe. So with that, guys, we're going to discontinue this one and head over to the members-only portion, which will be uploaded to Ground School Academy underneath the Pilot's Inner Circle here in about 15 minutes. I'll have that up so you guys will be able to listen to that and submit for your FAA Wings credit. Guys, thank you so much for being such a blessing to myself, my beautiful bride, and our wonderful business. You guys are the reason we do everything we do each and every day. So thank you for that. Any questions, you guys know how to get in touch with me. And most importantly, guys, remember that a good pilot is always learning. Have a great day, guys. See ya.